I'm Edie Lush, and I'm here at the Hub Culture Studio with a repeat guest, Doug McCauley. Thank you for coming by.
Thanks for having me, Edie. It's good to be back.
Professor of Marine Biology at UCSB and Director of the Benioff Ocean Initiative.
Right.
Now, when we met last year, we followed up the conversation in September. The issue was around the enormous problem that plastic is providing or is having within the world. Just give me some milestones on where we are now.
Yeah, so for better or worse, we're getting better handle on the volumes, the numbers of plastic that are in our world, in our oceans. So it's about 5 trillion with a T pieces of plastic that are out there in the oceans. That's right. And unfortunately, we're finding it everywhere. So 2018 was a great or a terrible year for research. We realized that we have plastic particles in tap water, in beer. That was a real hit for me. In sea salt, in fact, in human bodies.
In human bodies. So microplastics are in us. We saw it at the bottom of the deepest part of the ocean. That's what really got me.
Yeah, in the Marianas Trench. So in the deepest part of the ocean, all the way up in the Arctic, on my beach at home where I walk my dog. So it's everywhere, right? So it's this global issue, and it's not just a cosmetic thing that it makes my beach where I walk my dog less pleasant. It's a real toxin, it's a real hardship, a grand new challenge for wildlife in our oceans, and for us, of course.
Exactly. So one of the things that is exciting about this year is that we're not just talking about the problem, but also some of the solutions. So tell me about, well, first of all, set the context for me in terms of where you think it's important to focus.
Yeah, so one of our focuses in the Benioff Ocean Initiative, and of course I have a bit of a bias being a marine biologist or a scientist, but is that all of this fast-moving science is giving us better insight about where we can actually strategically, sort of tactically direct our investments and our effort, right? This is a huge problem, right? A global problem, plastics everywhere. Where do you put your money? Where do you put your effort? Where do you direct experts' attention? So there's some great new science that's coming up that's saying, go here, work here, do this. So for example, when I was leaving Davos last year, in the airport, in the newspaper rack, there was an article that was highlighting that 90% of the plastic that goes into the oceans via rivers come through just 10 rivers. So that's great. You don't have to go everywhere. Perhaps you start with one of those 10 rivers. So that's the kind of strategy that we need to make a difference.
So tell me where those rivers are. I was in India over Christmas and New Year, and I was blown away by the amount of single-use plastic everywhere, on the streets, in the villages, in the cities, in the sea, in rivers.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that some of those rivers are in India.
They are. There are some in India, there are some in Southeast Asia, in China, there are some in West Africa. But I want to point out that the problem rivers in many ways are an opportunity. It's knowing where some of those low-hanging fruit are help us sort of build leadership opportunities with India, with China, other countries. And in fact, many of the countries, many of the leadership in these countries are already stepping up. India's made a commitment by 2022 to actually make some very progressive moves to cut single-use plastics in the country. So there's a lot of willingness in those countries, in those spots, to work on this problem. And I should also say, you know, close to home, we are as culpable as some of our friends and neighbors. So, you know, Los Angeles River, close to where I was born, a huge polluter of plastic. So we have some good opportunities for international collaborations and some work to actually do in our own backyards.
So tell me, let's look at the scope of the problem. And from these 10 rivers and the plastic that ends up finally in the ocean, you've brought me something very special to look at. What is it?
I have indeed. I would wager that I'm the only person who is traveling into Davos with Albatross Vomit, which is what you're holding there in your hands.
I've never held albatross vomit before in my hands.
Pleased to bring it to you, Edie. So a lot of the work that I do is on coral reefs. And this vomit is from the Laysan albatross, which goes down to these remote coral reefs to actually breed and to raise its young. It's spectacular. If you need some love lessons, I sometimes draw a lot of inspiration from this albatross. 1.3 million of them on these coral atolls, singing and dancing to try to court and convince their mate to mate. Better than any party you'll see anywhere on Davos, let me tell you that. Anyway, the unfortunate thing about this particular albatross is it goes to sea, and as it's looking for food to feed its young, its chicks, it's duped by us and by plastic pollution. So instead of collecting squid or fish, it's collecting lighters, and it's collecting toothbrushes and toy soldiers and bringing them back and feeding them to their offspring. And so this vomit is what the chicks are trying to expel, the part that is of no nutrient value to them. Unfortunately, Some successfully get some of that out,
Right.
others don't.
And it looks like a huge selection of different kinds of plastic. So this is fishing line or
That's-
rope?
Well, it's a little hard to say, but yeah, that's a plastic polymer, sort of a filament that could have been part of a fishing net, could be part of a fishing line, could be, a multi-strand rope that's sort of broken apart, and that's what that is.
We've got,
Yeah.
this is really sad. It's like a plastic toy ice cream cone.
That's right. Like one of the things I might get for my 5-year-old out of a vending machine, and they enjoy for a minute and a half. The sad part is that this, along with a lot of the other plastics that are in our lives for seconds, are in the oceans for hundreds, sometimes close to 1,000 years.
And you can drive actually if you
Oh,
want with
sure.
the plastic. Tell me
Okay.
what else we've got in there.
Well, you have, at least I should point out,
Yeah.
some natural things. So
Right.
this is a squid beak. It's what you want to see in that vomit. That's just hard parts that are not digestible that the chick's expelling. And you have a mix of things that you don't want to see, and a large proportion of that. So here's some styrofoam. We're talking about that. You can sort of make sure you can feel that sort of.
Right.
It could have been, a coffee cup or a lunch plate or something like that.
Yeah.
It looks like here you have maybe a cap from a squeeze bottle or something, and a mix of other hard plastics here. Sometimes, actually don't see anything here that has labeling on it, but sometimes you can actually see the label of the manufacturer, which is just somehow deeply insulting to see, a product with a label on it inside the body of this spectacular, wonderful, regal animal. But many problems that the plastic pollution can cause those chicks, and it's not just albatross. There are about 660 species of marine wildlife that have been documented to be negatively impacted by plastic pollution.
So tell me, and I'm obviously interested in hope and optimism as well as reality. So the initiatives that you're talking about that we hear about in Davos on their own are incredible, but need scaling up, right? So if we're going to solve the issue in order to improve the oceans, in order to improve people's lives, health, welfare, all the sustainable development goals, we need scale up on a massive level. And do you see evidence of that?
Yeah. Well, I feel like there's a bit of a change. I feel like last year and years prior, just here in town, we were talking about this problem, and the volume was getting louder and louder of talking. I feel like we maybe crossed a transition point where this year at Davos, there's a lot of doing and not just talking. So you have industries that are banding together, some that are making multi-million-dollar commitments. There's a group that came together to make $1 billion commitment last week. So you'll need that sort of raw capital to try to figure out how to do the important things like design new materials that don't have a 500-year lifespan. The world is talking about this issue, and it wasn't before. And that can inspire behavior change, which then can inspire policy change. And that's all we need. We need, new materials to replace this stuff, which we don't want to be leaving as our legacy in the oceans. We need people to change behavior and policy to change to absorb those new materials into industry. So I feel like we're beginning to see momentum there. It's a huge problem, so we've got a long way to go, but I feel like we're heading in the right way, and there's actually some energy behind this.
I want to ask you a personal question. What's the weirdest thing you've seen in Davos? And you can't say albatross vomit.
Well, weirdest thing, last year I brought live jellyfish to Davos, which
Right.
was actually easier to explain than these Swiss customs officials than albatross vomit, but I'm sure there are weirder things out there. I would like to actually find somebody else with something weirder than what I'm bringing, but I'm looking for good suggestions. I've yet to find them out there.
And the motto of the World Economic Forum is improving the state of the world. You mentioned the initiatives that get announced here. Do you see real evidence of change happening because of things that happen at Davos, or is it more a place to announce great things?
Yeah. Well, maybe those things are connected, right? In the case of oceans, which is, half of our planet, I think it's great to actually see more and more conversation about oceans. This year there's more oceans conversation than have ever been hosted before at Davos. There's an entire day dedicated to oceans conversation, which is special. That means that you have people that historically have never thought of oceans, whatever, a CEO of an energy company or a plastics company or a tech company sitting down and learning about it. And when they actually learn about the scope of the problems, they can at least have a little bit of the hope or raw material to make change. So, I guess I'm inspired by the amount and the volume and the energy around the environment, specifically around oceans, but I guess I'm hopeful that all of that, turns into something positive.
Doug, thank you very much for stopping by the Hub Culture studio here in Davos to talk about life underwater, one of the Sustainable Development Goals, and all the other connections. And I'm Edie Lush.